What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. I'm your host, Stu Day, and we're moving into the summer. The sun has been shining, the weather's been getting better. It's been a little bit wet on and off this week, but we're getting there. You can feel the warmth on the bones. The mornings are lighter, the evenings are lighter. For me, that makes a huge difference. And with it being Mental Health Awareness Week this week, it's just something to think about in terms of how people are feeling, and I'm sure in your organizations they've done different things to acknowledge that it's been Mental Health Awareness Week. But something to think about is obviously mental health awareness isn't just a single day of the year. It's not a week of the year. It's not a month of the year. It's every single day for some people, and you don't always know what people are going through behind a smile. So make sure you reach out to people, check in on people, make sure they're okay, and also look after yourselves. Right, we've got a lot of episodes and blog posts and things like that that are related to mental health awareness and well-being, and all those things. So why not dip into them if you need to watch something, listen to something, read something, or reach out to me. If you ever just want to have a chat, you're more than welcome. Happy to have a chat and just happy to listen as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that before we get into today's episode, of which I've got another great guest joining us this evening. And we're going to be digging into our guest's journey, from his origin. You could call it a little bit of an origin story. Those X-Men origin stories. Yeah, well, we've got a better one for you, right? This isn't an X-Men there, but this is a much better origin story. All the way through to his current role and what he's doing in that space. We're going to touch on a bit around AI as well. So we're going to cover a lot today. And I'm going to bring our guest on now. So our guest is Jagrit Gyawali. How are you doing, Jag?
Thank you, Stu. I'm doing really well, thank you, and hope you are as well. How is it going?
It's going well. Yeah, it's going well. Obviously, I was just talking a little bit about mental health awareness there, and how important it is to be mindful of that with people and stuff like that. And so I don't know. Have you done anything where you're working at the moment around that this week?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mental Health Awareness Week, very important. I think you've covered it already. Like, it's not about a day in a year, a week in a year. At BBC, we kind of take mental health seriously in terms of things that are available for people. Whether it's some support, medical support, whatever that might be. BBC kind of takes it seriously as well.
Yeah.
And there are different sort of forums running, and there are different groups where people can just go and chip in, in terms of what they know, or just go and understand what's going on in that space.
Nice.
So yeah, there's definitely talk around the time about that. But I think what's important is that it's very important, and for us to produce the best work possible, it's very important that we're kind of looking after each other.
100%.
That empathy and all the rest of it with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Jag, you touched on there that you're working at the BBC, right? But for those that don't know you, like we've talked a little bit already, and we've got to know each other over the last few weeks as we've planned this episode, and we met in person at a recent Ministry of Testing event, didn't we, in London? But by all means, please go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, so I'm Jag. Like everybody, I've I suppose got different dimensions. I'm a keen cricketer. I listen to music. I read every now and then, travel. But I suppose for our quality folks, I'm currently at BBC quality engineering manager. You'll probably find it slightly different to test manager, right? So I really push on quality being an overarching thing, and for it to be sort of baked in as a culture in an organization, right? So we're individuals, we're kind of contributing in our own sort of right, but at the end of the day, we're all coming together. So that's me currently. But yeah, so I've got a little bit of a technical sort of API tester background, going back several years now. I feel old. consultancy, your website designing, all the rest of it. But I've always really leaned more on like quality aspects of software development.
Nice. Yeah. And where obviously, I always ask guests this in terms of, what their journey has looked like over their career. And I've always been interested in sort of the origin story. I joked there on the intro, but everybody has a different origin story when it comes to being in our world, and actually into tech generally nowadays, more so as well. Can you talk a bit more about your sort of, where did your journey start? Way back,
Yeah,
way back, wherever that was, Jag. I don't know.
yeah. So I was born in Nepal, and sort of moved to the UK, studied in the UK,
Mm,
graduated, did my master's actually, like, straight after my first degree as well.
yeah.
A lot of it was like not sure in terms of what I wanted to do, to be honest,
Mm,
because, I would sort of like certain elements one day and then I'd go, I want to be a project manager. But I couldn't become a project manager without any experience at the
yeah.
same time, right? So by the time I kind of learned about um, some core skills of like IT, software development, data modeling, and all those things. I was doing a little bit of freelance work, as a website designer. I've always
Mm,
liked the design element of your software or web application development or
yeah.
mobile. Um, so I was not sure, to be honest, right? Even when I was doing my master's degree, I was like applying to all sorts of different roles.
Mm,
And I was sort of doing a little bit of like solutions consultant type work where I would sort of
okay.
talk to small businesses and sort of get their requirements and convert those into whether it's a web application or static websites, whatever that is, and sort of delivering out that to them. Um, but I suddenly realized that it kind of got a little bit repetitive and salesy, and that's definitely not
Mm,
something I wanted to do. And one opportunity sort of came up in, it was like a proper training, right? 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Training, and then they would sort of guarantee your job placement in a few months. It
okay.
ended up taking me 4 months, but I think the amount I learned during that training, I'm really thankful for that training.
Mm,
Was definitely a lot more than my master's degree, right? So it was practical. It was about how industry kind of
mm,
works, how teams work, the whole agile and test automation, all of those things that was talked about. It was fairly early days, really, for I mean, test automation was kind of done, but not as structured.
yeah.
So I got to sort of learn those skills very early on through that training, and it was like when I was placed, first thing at Jet2, that was the reason I moved to Leeds like 10 years ago, just
Oh,
over.
wow. Yeah.
Um, I was like a mid-level consultant, right? So hit the
Yeah.
ground running, had these skills with me. I could, quickly sort of point out, or do some sort of quality audit straight away without not much industry experience in quality engineering. And that gave me, so much confidence
Mm,
and started sort of, learning more about the product, the process, corporate world. It was a great learning experience. So that's, even though my initial contract was 3 months and
mhm,
I did, I was looking at returning to London, right, and sort of maybe trying out other things, but it ended up being really well and it helped me grow. I kind of started sort of finding a little bit of purpose in quality
mm,
engineering. So that's where the whole journey started. And, always been passionate about, anything I might have done even before that, cricket, music, and all these things, right? So quality kind of became a part of me after
nice.
that.
It does.
Yeah.
It becomes all consuming, doesn't it? Once it hooks
Yeah.
you in, you're like, you can't get away from it. It's really weird. Um, Jack, in terms of like, you mentioned there that like during that 4 months, you learned more than you did doing your masters and that element because it was more practical.
Yeah.
What sort of, what did it give you in terms outside of that practicality? What else did it kind of give you that maybe your the standard, let's say, education didn't?
Yeah. It's so important that you ask me that. Look, today I'm really passionate about growing people, and that's
Mm,
one of the even though I'm maybe a head of test or engineering manager, I do spend a lot of time with juniors and graduates just because I want to give them the best opportunity possible.
yeah.
Um, I mean, soft skills. I mean, underrated is understatement, I think. So that's one of the key things that we'll need in any role
Yeah.
to succeed. I think, university, not a lot of focus around that. So obviously communication's a big part because you're doing your assessment exams and presentations and everything. But
Yeah.
but when it comes to sort of teamwork, understanding like concept of project, sharing workload, like working with each other. We
Yeah.
did a lot of like role play type exercise as well in that, in those 4 months where I was maybe a project manager one day and I'd sort of wear a completely different hat, and I'd be an actual like engineer. I'd be writing code and I'd have to wear a different hat, although I knew aspects of project management.
Yeah.
But I was kind of playing a different role, right? Which kind of meant, we had insights into all these different roles. And by the time we came out of that training, we could wear multiple hats. That ended up becoming our strength, not just me, all the people who were in that program with me.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot around soft skills, communication, workload management, being able to say no as well. Like university doesn't ever teach you that, just being able to say, actually, I can't do it maybe, or I don't know. University is not great at sort of teaching those skills, I think. So yeah, definitely, a lot around soft skills, the core like skills as well of, in my case, software development or quality engineering. Your PR reviews, for example, would have our, a trainer sort of have a go at us, at writing like poor code, for example. We couldn't
Right.
quite at university. We could be marked poorly, for example, but there was no real that feedback loop there. But yeah, I think that training really, I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, and it's even now like grads that I've worked with over recent years, that have gone through their computer science degrees, and they don't. I'm not saying that their communication is bad or anything like that, but they don't really understand quality. They don't really understand testing, and that's still stuff that they have to learn. And that holistic view, coming back to you said earlier about you've got that you're within a quality engineering role now, which is different to being a test manager, right? They don't have that thinking, and obviously we have to develop that with them. And I think that that's something that maybe is missing a trick, more and more within sort of further education as people are doing and looking to then move into a career in tech, or something like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, but times change as well. So, sometimes, I kind of really wonder how this generation kind of thinks. They think really differently.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of it's okay. We thought differently to our parents, right? So we were always sort of,
Yeah.
that's a generational thing as well. But you're right, in terms of the core skills and those things. Yeah, but, I don't think the graduates come out prepared with all of those.
No, and I mean, we're going to come on to AI a bit later. I don't want to jump into that discussion too soon, else we'll go off way off on a tangent. But it'll be interesting to see how that shapes out,
100%,
as
yeah.
that's now a core aspect of what everybody's doing, right? And everybody's needing to learn and stuff. And yeah, I just want to, Jag, it's obviously you've been in the industry for a few years now, and when we was at the MOT London chapter event,
Yeah.
and you gave your talk, it was all around quality engineering and how things have evolved and stuff like that. And I'm interested for you to share more broadly with our audience, what your thinking is around quality engineering, but also how that's kind of evolved over time. Because quality engineering as a term is still relatively new, but some of those concepts have been around for a while, and it's just how we've kind of now plugged them together and maybe molded them differently.
Yeah, I'll have a go, Stu, and I'd like to
Yeah,
get your thoughts as well about this. But I
100%.
think
Yeah.
it is an interesting
Yeah.
subject, isn't it? And it's how we've maybe evolved with it as well, and our
Yeah.
roles have kind of evolved with the whole. It's the part and parcel of
Yeah.
in what we do. From like, how I put it, right? I run a lot of QA education pieces within my organization, and the idea is to kind of take the non-technical stakeholders through, what it means, what quality engineering or what generally engineering means as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, them sort of going, I want, this piece of work out by Friday, in some cases, right? So we're not as disorganized as that, but it's not the same as going, come try and understand how we work, right? So I try and make sure people are educated. So a lot of it's around like expectations as well. Like, if we go back 10 years, test automation, yes, it was a concept back then, but I think, things were siloed, right? So it kind of almost, I know waterfall and things like that, I get it, but things were like completely siloed. So it felt like, the QAs and engineering teams, they were kind of, not on the same page, right? They were kind of doing, I mean, they're still doing different roles, but it didn't feel like they were operating as one team in my experience. And I think, it's fair to say, like, I've heard the same from so many others as well.
Yeah.
That over time, that line sort of blurring, in some organizations, maybe not as much, but I think in some organizations, absolutely. So, sometimes, I've had QAs fix bugs and things like that. So it's how extreme you want to go. But that line, that remit, that's blurring. So there's like feedback sort of going both ways and things like that. But I think, the more recent sort of quality engineering evolution, I think we're talking about, it's like baking quality into engineering practice.
Yeah.
It's not just about QAs and sort of engineers working together. Fine, I found a bug, I reported to a dev, we've tried to produce that locally and things like that. I think, that's 5 years ago, great stuff, but now we're actually looking at preventing stuff. So how can we actually work together to prevent, bugs from happening? I mean, we'll never get there, I'm sure, but
There'll always be bugs. There'll always be
there'll always be bugs, right?
Yeah, of
And it's
course.
okay. It's just,
Yeah.
But I think it's how we're collectively working and strategizing to prevent bugs is what modern quality engineering to me means.
Yeah.
Which means that we're collectively challenging requirements in some cases, collectively defining and deciding benchmark or your baseline for performance and things like that.
Yeah.
And nobody's really pointing finger at each other. Like, back when we started, maybe, I found a bug, why? So you'd kind of get those questions, but I'm sure there are questions like that still, but I think those are starting to disappear. We're quickly going, let's learn from this. We won't repeat this. There's no point in, finger pointing. So yes, evolved from a completely siloed practice to sort of working together to actually now baking that into culture. As a part of, our engineering culture. That's how I've seen it evolve. Be good to get your view on this too, as well.
Yeah, look, I like some of the words. So I'm going to pull out some of the words you were just saying there, Jag, because you used the word collectively a few times. So we're collectively challenging requirements. We're collectively, baselining performance, and that for me is the real essence of what we're trying to achieve when we talk about quality engineering, or systemic quality, if you like, thinking about how we build it in across the entire system. And for me, well, you'll know this because you'll have heard some of the things I've talked about previously, but there's 4 parts to how I break this out, and that's people, process, tools, and then finally outcomes. And the outcomes piece is, what are the things that we're trying to achieve by having this 3 amigos? What are we trying to achieve that ultimately bakes quality in, right? By having this automation, what are we trying to achieve? What outcome are we trying to achieve that ultimately bakes quality? And those are the things that we often forget. Like, we keep doing all these things, but we don't really know how they collectively come together to be the building blocks for overall quality. So that for me is why I put that emphasis on the outcomes piece. So if I'm, if I've just started a new role as quality leader at Blue Light Card, absolutely loving it, but we're going on a bit of a journey, right? We've got to mature our practices, which is great. We're looking to start building out more automation capability, but rather than just jumping in and going, right, we know we need it, right? So we could just jump in and start building it. And we've done a couple of workshops to talk about what is the purpose, why do we even need to automate in the first place. What are the sort of different levels of maturity that we can sort of guide ourselves towards, rather than going, let's just dive in and figure it out as we go. And this isn't to slow us down. This is just to give us sort of things to aim for, because you can start, becoming overwhelmed, right? But then also, then what are the foundational pieces that allow us to then achieve that, the next level and the next level and the next level? And that isn't just the tool that we're going to use. That's the ways of working. That's the cultural mindset shift, and so on. So for me, it's that holistic point around, you can have the best tools in the world, but they don't work without people. Even with AI, they still don't work without people. I'm sorry, people, but there you go. And, you can have the best processes in the world, but you'll still need tooling to enable some of those things, right? So they all interlock. But knowing why, the outcome is why. Why am I doing this thing, right? Not because I've been told to, but because there is a purpose behind it. It enables quality in some way, shape, or form. So, and that's how I look at it.
I wholeheartedly agree there. I mean, I think you mentioned something there. I'm being told. I think that's. But when I became a test lead, right? So I kind of, obviously got handed over some QAs, and one of the things I sort of got told then was, they're really good at following, execution steps, but not. I'm like, that's not good enough. So they clearly need support then, right? So it's not, if you're being told about how to care for quality, I don't think we're doing justice to our roles, right? So a lot of it's intuitive, a lot of it's sort of, your internal, I don't know, like personal skills as well in some ways. And it's about knowing why you're doing anything that you do as a quality engineering professional. And it is absolutely important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But then also, if you're having the conversation with your software engineer and you want them to write cleaner code, or you want them to add IDs to their code so that you can hook it more easily into your automate, helping them understand why, right? And conversely, them helping you understand why they're doing certain things in certain ways, and actually, that makes sense now, right? It's like, and often there has been that us and them. And I don't just mean between quality engineers or software testers and devs. It's like, and product. And there's always felt like there's been this little bit of a divide. But actually, everybody within that team, or everybody within that structure, has a big part to play in achieving, quality, continuously throughout, right? So
You're
for
right.
me, quality engineering is much more than just an individual trying to encourage, champion, embed. It's about the whole team, contributing in the ways that they contribute.
Yeah. So, I mean, things don't always go in a straight line, right? So there's going to be a difference in opinion, and things like that. So I think when there was a bigger purpose, like you said there, right? So where, everybody's kind of coming together, collective effort. So taking a step back as well, right? So it's okay to get some feedback. And sometimes, I've maybe had, engineers in the past kind of taking some feedback personally, but it's kind of communicating it right as well, and having that bigger purpose as well, and why we're doing it. We're not marking anybody's homework here. We're sort of working together to achieve something. So there's that common purpose. So I think I always go back to that, right? So whenever I see some QAs maybe having a little bit of a hard time with some engineers, right? So where there are maybe some differences in opinions and things like that. So it's sort of taking a step back and going, why are we doing this, and why is it important? It's important to be heard. But by the time we're kind of spending a lot of time sort of going back and forth, if we think about our priorities and focus, and that generally solves a lot of problems as well.
Yeah, it does. And we started talking about skills, and we've touched on it a few times, around different skills. And during your 4 months of that the training that you did, you developed a lot of soft skills and a more all-rounded skill set. And I think that that's something that we have to be mindful of when it comes to our roles, and when we're trying to be catalysts for let's say for the greater good when it comes to quality, right? But there's so many different skills that we need in our toolkit, aren't there, these days? And it's not just about being somebody that can test some software, raise some bugs.
Yeah.
It's much broader. What's your experience with that, Joe?
No, I agree. One of the reasons why I chose to become like a QA professional over, like
Mm,
full-on software engineer or business analyst was also an option. Was that right? So being able to wear multiple hats.
yeah.
We've got to think like engineers when we're maybe designing. Obviously, I'm quite passionate about like design patterns and your automation framework and making sure we're writing some maintainable, scalable solutions. So I think like an engineer when I'm sort of talking about those things, right?
Mm,
So I get that. At the same time, I can kind of take a complete step back and think like a product manager going, these features won't quite work for us,
yeah.
and a lot of times you're sort of thinking as a, you know, QA. I mean, QA is a part of like,
Yeah.
the mindset. We need to sort of be like good quality professionals to me, right?
Yeah.
Testing is one skill from so many that we need. And it's sort of think, okay, so how can it break? Where are the weaknesses? Where are the problems? And, what are the risks? I think risks, the like being able to understand risk is like a key skill as well. And sometimes, people get hung up on it's not quite working. I mean, yeah, fine. It's not important for this,
Mm,
release. We should be able to make calls like that as well. Sometimes we've got to be blunt. So
yeah.
yeah, soft skills definitely to manage communication, manage expectations, understand risks, and to grow. I mean, you need soft skills in life to grow and whatnot, and some hard skills as well, right? So we've got to be able to understand. I mean, if we can understand code and if we can give our engineers feedback, if we can understand data like code
Yeah.
smells, your unit test coverage and things like that, we're having better conversations. So we've got those tools, right? And it makes, all of a sudden the conversations kind of become a little bit more productive and we're kind of
Yeah.
being able to challenge work and not just having this like black box view as well. And
Mm,
also at the same time, we've got to be able to take a step back and think black box as well. So it's not like we're always sort of in the detail either. So it's sort of, zooming in and out, as QA. So that's what I like about the role.
yeah.
And I see, some QAs who've kind of got this understanding of they've got to switch roles a little bit here and there, and they've got to be flexible, adapt. They tend to do better than the ones kind of rigid and kind of set, sort of with a bit of a fixed mindset about this is how I want to work, and
Yeah.
when I find a problem, I'll raise it, and yes, so it doesn't quite work like that. So you've got to, I think there was a range of skills that a QA professional would need to kind of succeed, or
Mm,
becoming, to become a tester is easy, I feel, compared to so many other job roles there might be. It is controversial, I get it, but to become like a good QA or good tester is equally as hard.
mm.
So yeah, so it's kind of entirely up to people, what they're trying to sort of achieve as QA professionals.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is important for people to be able to continue to build on those skills, and I liken it to something that me and Chris have spoken about before, where we talk about like T-shaped people or T-shaped teams. Well, I actually think about tree-shaped people. So,
Yeah,
a person might have a number of different branches that they've got growing
you're
that allow
right.
them to enable them for different skills, right?
Yeah,
And so it doesn't have to be so cut and dry as to like, this is
no,
my
you're right.
my profession, this is my speciality, and then across, for those who can't see, I'm making a T. The sort of like your
You make me think as well. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, I'm sure, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
So have you had like people from completely different background come into QA and actually do really well?
Yes. Yeah,
Can we
yeah,
go
yeah.
through some examples, maybe?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've had people that have come in from finance backgrounds, from warehouse, working in
Yeah,
warehousing. When I was at Dunelm, we had people coming across from the store, so people that worked in store, because they understand the business, right? They understand the business. They understand like what customers do on a day-to-day basis. So it's great, right? They've already got those thoughts. They already can ask those difficult questions. I think
yeah,
I've also been around people that have come from, they've done degrees in zoology and
yeah,
then moved over and done like a boot camp from
yeah.
a software testing perspective, and they're smashing it out the park. It's like, it's so interesting because historians are really
Yeah.
because they're so critical with their thinking, and I think there's so much opportunity. One of the things that I've always got frustrated about is I don't think we cast the net wide enough for quality professional roles. I think that sometimes we put too much emphasis on we must have these technical skills. Actually, I think the softer skills that matter more, and their aptitude and ability to learn those technical skills can come, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think we create enough opportunity to do that. I don't know. I mean, is there? But BBC is large, right? And I'm interested to understand: is there any sort of ways that you sort of are able to do that there?
Yeah, within, I mean, there's obviously a boundary there, right? But we
Yeah, of
do
course.
run like hot shoe programs where we can
Nice.
have like people, you know, reading news for. I mean, they would never come and do testing for us, but
Why not?
runners and but we've had people from completely different background, right? So I think we had some like runners, like like creating these
Yeah.
BBC shows, right? Wanting to go, I want to understand, what you do in testing. So we've had, people from that background come and sort of
Yeah.
do testing for 3 weeks. And, we kind of give them the best environment for them to understand what testing is about.
Yeah.
We recently did one program and actually, I think she was in like, what is this, like digital media? I mean,
Yeah.
somewhat, I mean, a little bit of IT, but sort of
Mm.
different though, right? So this is about like TV shows and things like that.
Yeah.
From that to testing, like she's actually considering potentially moving into QA, right?
Nice.
So that's a great thing, and I think you're right. So we don't quite cast the nets wide enough, but
Yeah.
yeah, I've had people from different backgrounds. We do like internships and graduate programs and things like that as well to go
Yeah.
with it. But I'd like to do more of that though.
Yeah.
And I think I've had like a DZ come into like testing.
Oh.
Done really well.
Yeah.
It's honestly like police officer.
Yeah.
Obviously, quite thorough.
Yeah.
The questioning style and things like that. So slightly different. So you kind of get these personalities,
Yeah.
and I actually really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think yeah, you're right. So as long as people are willing to learn the skills they need, the technical skills, right? I mean, coding is something that people can learn at home. There's so much resource out there now, right?
Yeah.
So if people are really willing to learn coding, I mean, it's not impossible anymore. You don't really need a teacher to teach you it anymore, right? So there's so much online resource. But I think soft skills where people are, good understanding of time management, organization, all the rest of it. I think that always helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I just want to talk around this a little bit more because it's got my brain going, and I think like as businesses, I feel sometimes we're very reactive to things to when it comes to hiring. So we've got a new project that we're spinning up. We need X amount of people.
Yeah.
Okay, which ultimately means we need X amount of experienced people to come in and do the
Yeah.
role because we haven't got time to train them up, right? But
Yeah.
one of the things that I think we often miss a trick with, and it's great to hear that you're doing those sort of like creating those spaces and opportunities, and it's something I've tried to do in the past as well, where you have your sort of your pipeline, your hiring pipeline for your projects and things like that, but subsequently to that, you've got a talent pipeline that you're building, and that
Yeah.
can be through juniors, career switchers, all these sorts of things, which you're then able to allow them a bit more time and space to develop. They can be within these projects, but they're not the key people that are and stuff like that. And I think sometimes there's both a monetary and time level of
Yeah.
investment, and I think
Yeah.
sometimes we overlook that, and we don't necessarily
Absolutely
create
right.
those opportunities.
Yeah, no, you're right. Capability building, having some form of like center of
Mm.
excellence, and it doesn't have to be like excellent people or the most experienced people, right? I think Jet2 did that really well. I really hope they still do it. There was like a graduate program would kind of get a bunch of graduates, right? I don't think there was any limits as long as they did well in these assessments. There were, hired essentially, and they would kind of go through like different teams, engineering for I think 6 weeks at a
Hmm.
time, I think something like that. So it would go on for a year, and then they would decide where they or what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
The idea is by that time, so whether they wanted to go into engineering or QA or product management, they've got that the
Mm.
tools that they need, the mindset that they need. They kind of go through that training process. It was really, really good. And my focus was obviously not so much anymore, but maybe still in some organizations, but kind of, there's always a little bit of noise about, QA's been kind of looked down on. Like
Mm.
anybody can do QA, right? So it's not, I hated that element, one, I was prepared to have any technical, challenging conversations with anybody,
Yeah.
architects, I mean, it's not about who knows more, right? So I was more than prepared to have these conversations. I felt really bad when people sort of, sometimes sort of said, QA is easy, or anybody
Mm.
can be a QA, or, um,
Yeah.
you people, so I didn't like that divide. So I
Yeah.
was really passionate about investing very heavily, at the grassroots level. So with these graduates, right? So my goal was to convert as many as I could into like full-time QA professionals. And we did really well. I think, out of 6 1 year, 3 of them joined the QA team. You
Nice.
know,
Yeah.
it was kind of giving them, one, their view of, what they want to achieve in the future. For example,
Mm.
it was not one of those things where you go, I'll try that out for a year and I don't know what happens next, right? It was giving them, okay, so you've got a career path here, right? So you
Mm.
can become a successful person by, sort of starting here. This is the program, right? So kind of giving them that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really passionate about that. So I think, going back to what you mentioned there, as opposed to sort of being overly reactive to, oh, we're suddenly going to need an automation tester, actually building that capability, and for like early careers as well,
Yeah.
where they kind of, learn all the skills that they need very early on, very quickly, and then, their roles can be remodeled. Yeah, I kind of believe in that, where the companies allow, organizations kind of allow where there is time, money, budget, all those things.
Mm.
I always want that, I make sure there's at least one junior
Yeah.
in my sort of org, if you like, just so that they kind of become a bit of a 5-year plan for me.
Yeah.
The goal is to kind of make them a senior, so I hired a junior 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I had two, but one had to go back to Ireland. But one, been promoted to a mid-level now, so that they're doing really well, right? So we're kind of challenging them, giving them the right
Mm.
skill set, tools, challenging them, and within 5 years, I kind of want to see them at that level. So by that time, we've learned more than them, really, right? So by
Mm.
growing someone, developing someone, so yeah, I believe in what you believe in there,
Yeah.
about a little bit sort of proactive about capability building.
Yeah. I think, yeah, we just need to do more. It's great to hear that you're doing that, and I've been part of grad schemes where we've done that as well, where we've had grads come in, and I've been lucky enough to keep one of them or two of them in the quality space. But it's not what they come out of university thinking they're going to do, right? So it can be a tough sell sometimes.
Yeah, very tough.
Um, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, right. And speaking of tough sells, obviously, we talked earlier about that sort of that new perception or that new way of thinking from a quality engineering perspective, and we've talked about the sort of the skills and stuff like that. And from a leadership point of view, one of the things that I find most challenging is it feels like sometimes you can be almost, it feels like you're almost on your own sometimes when you're trying to influence these cultural changes, and it can be hard, right? And I'm just interested to understand how maybe you've gone about that, Jag, because again, whether that be currently or previously, just interested to understand how you've kind of maybe tried to influence those things when you've maybe been the only person in a leadership role that's kind of,
Yeah.
I guess, responsible for it. And I'm using air quotes there, people, by the way. But yeah.
No, you're right. I mean, we've all kind of been through situations where we felt like, we're kind of pushing the wall. It's not moving
Mm.
anywhere. And I think, what's helped is finding allies, really, like
Mm.
it could be anywhere, it could be, within your organization, like in UX team, or it could be anywhere, like people who understand you. So, I spend a lot of time sort of networking within, like, every time I kind of join a new company,
Yeah.
it's about understanding where the company is at, how people
Yeah.
think, it's absolutely stupid. I mean, what you said earlier, sorry, we were going off tangent there, but you're kind of spending a lot of time trying to understand, the problems, right? So you're kind of
Yep.
sitting in these workshops. That's exactly what we need to do. So, there we'll kind of work out, okay, so this is where the company kind of sits in
Yep.
terms of like quality maturity, or any kind of maturity per se. For me, like, it's about kind of having allies who
Mm.
kind of think alike, and slowly sort of, you know, showing your vision, like, not a lot of talking, a lot of sort of demonstrating as well.
Yep.
I think winning management sometimes can be challenging as well. So it's about sort of wording things like, the whole zoom in, how much information you're kind of giving, how high level are you keeping, if you've got a quick 1 minute pitch that you need to prepare to kind of
Mm.
take your VP through it, what does that sound like, as opposed to kind of taking your, test leads that you manage, through the same thing, right? So it's kind of understanding that. Yeah, it can be a lonely place though. I mean, especially with remote working at times, right?
Mm.
You're kind of working on something, people aren't quite perceiving it that way. It can be challenging, and that's nature of leadership, I think.
Yeah.
But I think, the idea is to kind of adapt, change, take a step back where needed, push hard where needed, get a little bit of backing from, here, there, and everywhere where
Yeah.
needed as well. And I think education's that overarching thing, actually focusing on like greater good as opposed to your personal agendas. I mean, not that we have any, but I think, sometimes we can be hung up on like our, things we're overly
Mm.
passionate about,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
becomes about us as opposed to how that maybe helps the organization. So as long as those things are clearly understood, um, we mostly, move things, move the needles
Mm.
that we need, right? And prioritizing as well, like being ruthless in, obviously we can't change everything overnight. I've done this in the past where I've sort of gone, I found a problem there.
Yeah.
I'd like to change all of these, right? So I've sort of taken on too much.
Yeah.
And it doesn't quite how it works in real life. We've got to pick the stuff that we can make the most differences in, like low hanging fruits, right? So quickly sort of, sort those out and show what change as well. And a
Mm.
lot of, sometimes like starting simple and easy kind of gives you that momentum that you need to sort of look at bigger changes later on as well.
Yep.
Thankfully for me, it's been okay. In some teams, it's kind of taken a lot longer to kind of change some things, but I've sort of, been okay with some teams taking longer because,
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's people, and it's a collectively sort of going forward element that we need to look at.
Yeah.
What about you? I think it's a good question. This,
Yeah. I mean, I think I mean, there was a reason I asked it, Jack, right? Because
yeah,
I'm in this place right now, right? So I've
yeah,
just recently joined a new company, as I mentioned earlier, and a big part of that is understanding and learning where we are, but not just
yeah,
where we are, but why are we where we are, right?
yeah,
Because the historical element is what helps you understand the context.
mm,
So you can quite easily go in and go, oh, I can see that we are here, right? This is really obvious that we need automation, or we need this, or we need that. But what you don't know is that why are we there, right?
yeah,
Why are we in this situation, right? And that could be a cultural thing. That could be just a lack of investment by previous leadership. It could be a whole host of things, right? It could also be that the teams are overworked and they don't have enough time to do anything. So actually, going saying we need automation can be a really vicious cycle you get yourself into, because the teams don't have the capacity to add the automation, but the automation would help with capacity if we had it. It's that chicken and egg. So
yeah,
you really need to understand, like, why are we where we are, and it isn't about pointing the fingers, like you say, and it's just about understanding that context and building a level of empathy with the different disciplines within the teams, right? So understanding product, understanding our software engineering
yeah,
capabilities, understanding where we are from a QE QA perspective. Um, how do we? What is our delivery process like? How do we? what's our platform engineering, what's our data, there's just so many pieces to the puzzle. And to your point, you can become overwhelmed, like in trying to piece them all together. And I've had so many amazing conversations with people since I've joined Blue Light Card. People have been really open, really forthcoming, which makes my role that much easier because I can gather information more naturally rather than having to prize it out of people.
I know, it makes a big difference.
It does, but the challenge then becomes, what do you do with all that information? How do you categorize it? How do you prioritize it? And I think that's where sometimes you obviously, if you've been in the position before, I've been in this position before, you kind of you pull on your previous experience, right? But if you don't have previous experience, sometimes you just have to roll with it a little bit and just feel your way. And sometimes it is just gut, right, as well. So feeling like, and to your point, what are the small things that we can do that can start giving us a bit of momentum, start shaping kind of the direction we want to go, start influencing the culture, and then we can start building from there. You're not going to be able to change everything overnight, even though you could see everything, you'd be like, it's not going to happen.
You're right. I think, where things become quite important is sometimes, like, it's how we sell ourselves as well. Whether we're QAs or engineers, right? So we're kind of in that team, and we're sometimes, we can have tendencies to kind of over deliver as well, and that becomes a new normal, right? So sort of, it's not overly difficult to get a feature out to live without doing much automation or anything like that, right? So we could sometimes do it quicker because you're not having to do all these tests. If that becomes a normal, if delivery sort of go, oh, that's your velocity, we know it, we're going to, push more work at you. It doesn't quite work like that. So that's where that QA education or engineering education piece becomes quite important. Where, certain initiatives that we work on, these workshops also, they take time, right? So how do we make that so that things are sort of, become a part of delivery, essentially, so we've got time that's sort of accounted for, things like that. People have got visibility of what's been going on, and, what is that we're trying to do, and, what differences it will make after we actually achieve these things, right? So making that clear as well is important because, you probably had this as well, right? Some QAs are very passionate, working out of hours. They're kind of building these automation tests after 5 because they're passionate about it, right? So they're working extra a couple of hours in the evening and they're going, I've got this nice framework here. I don't want that to be the case, right? I want that to be a part of delivery and people to be aware of what's going on, like Story pointed where people work that way, make sure that becomes a part of delivery and it's not nice to have per se, right? So it becomes a part of the overall delivery as well. So, it's quite important we push for more time as well. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of we need some personal time, training time, and stuff like that. People talk about 10% capacity and stuff like that. That's great, but also about some spikes, some initiatives, and all these things as well.
Yeah, and we talk so much about making the work we do visible, and like to your point, somebody's passionate and they do want to do a couple of hours in the evening because they want to and they're passionate about. You don't want to stifle that, right? But it shouldn't be the norm. They should get that ability to create and innovate as part of their day job, right?
Yeah,
And
that's it.
it needs to be baked in the same way that we do need we have spikes for engineering tasks. We've got to build this thing. Not sure, gonna throw a spike in there, do a bit of discovery, understand it a bit more. Same thing, right? And I think sometimes I kind of wonder how sometimes we get ourselves, and I say get ourselves as a collective, quality professional community into these situations. And I wonder if it's more a case of because of how things have been in the past, it's just become the norm that we'll never get the time for these things, so we don't even try and ask anymore. Or is something else? I'm not sure, but it just feels like actually, if we push these push more for these things. I've had conversations with people like, yeah, we'll bring that into the sprint. That's fine. That's what we should be doing. Why aren't we doing it?
Yeah.
I just think we miss a trick sometimes. I don't know what
Yeah,
you
it's
think.
how we tell ourselves, in
Yeah.
our role. I mean, I'd keep going back to that.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, therefore, I do spend a lot of time with delivery people for them to understand.
Mm.
We make sure we're writing those BDD scenarios with product and BAs to engage with our scenarios. So it's that visibility element, and and make work as enjoyable, right? To where people are
Mm.
respecting each other. You kind of naturally get that. It doesn't have to be forced. We're not asking a sit at the table just
Yeah.
because we want to feel respected, right? So it's because we want to contribute and we want people to understand our perspective, mindset. So
Yeah.
yeah, education.
And it comes back to how we measure the value, right?
Yeah,
And the value of the work that we all do
yeah,
collectively, independently. How does it contribute to the bigger purpose? Kind of
yeah.
like we were saying
And that's
earlier.
one area, though. You're right. I think
Yeah.
that's one area where we can certainly do better.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes, I mean, you probably heard a lot of noise about we've automated these many scenarios, and I was quite glad that you said we're not going to jump into automation straight away, right? So it's no point, right? So it's understanding what difference we're trying. Are we trying to bring that lead time? Is
Yeah.
that why we're doing automation? The outcome stuff from your framework there, I
Yep.
think, yes, key. I think having conversation with anybody, showing, for example, the lead time before our automation effort was 3 days regression cycle. Now we've brought it down to 1 day because still front end, we need to do a lot of manual
Mm.
exploratory checks, but we've got a lot of automation tests kind of doing that. So, you've got something to show. You've got 3 days to 1 day, right?
Yep.
And you could sort of go, we've actually got this automation test running in the pipeline as well. So you can see tests are running, all green, something simple. There you go. So all of a sudden we've got these, matrix and insights to kind of share,
Yep.
and that means our kind of role within that is evolving as well. So yeah, quite passionate about matrix. That
Mm.
bug count. How's that maybe going a little bit,
Mm.
down? Sometimes spikes maybe, and we can sort of quickly work out, where we need to put effort as a quality team, how we need to strategize those things, and we can make these stakeholders, cross-functional partners, part of those conversations as well. And
Yeah.
we're leading those conversations, right? So we're not taking orders anymore. We're sort of going, with lights, sort of, make things faster, optimize. We don't want to be seen as like bottlenecks or quality gate. I know some people are passionate about quality gate. Personally, we're not a gate. We're enablers. We're trying to
Yep.
get things out faster, and we're having those positive conversations. Not just having conversations. I want to lead these conversations about
Mm.
quality with engineers. So I think there are certain areas. I mean, even at BBC, I could, I mean, we could be more confident in some ways as a QA team, right? So there are always
Mm.
areas for us to improve. But I
Yeah.
think, as an industry, yeah, I think, we can definitely do a little bit more. I think Callum says this as well, to kind of try and sell ourselves a little bit better and,
Yeah.
to make that bigger difference.
Yeah. 100%. And let's say it comes back to understanding the value of what we're doing and how that connects to the bigger picture. And I always want to, while we're sort of talking about value, I want to just touch on how we measure value, how we measure quality,
Yeah,
because this is always a hot topic, right?
I know.
And are we even measuring the right things in our teams? And you mentioned about you don't really want to sort of you're not that bothered about the number of automated tests you have, for example. But in your experience, Jag, what are the sort of things that you think make or have you've seen make the biggest difference when it comes to sort of measuring? Because obviously, you know, some teams will have their monitoring and observability in production, and they're getting really good. But just generally, what are some of the key things that you've seen, over time that you think these do really help?
Yeah, I think lead time, something I
Mm.
already sort of covered there, right? I think historically, I've kind of run like 7-day regression cycle,
Mm.
in some companies. So that's basically we're kind of retesting and doing a lot of like testing stuff, which means it's quite expensive to actually get a piece of change out to life, right?
Yeah.
So bringing that down kind of gives us a couple of things. One, it makes everybody's life less painful, so we're not having to run these tests, manually in many cases. Two, we're actually releasing things faster, so we're making these new features that are going to make us money or whatever out to our users or customers, quicker. So there's that clear benefit. I feel like that sells really well, and that gives us a good challenge as well. So not that kind of gets us thinking like, okay, risk focused, right? So
Yeah.
we need to understand this change might have a knock on effect there. So rather, it's easier to do like a longer regression cycle, right? So if you're shortening it, we've got to make some decisions there about risks, about coverage, and all those things. So for me, lead time is absolute key.
Yeah.
With backend, there's no point like spending, a long time to kind of get it out to life. So I'll quickly get it out to life and work backwards. So what do we need in order to, release things faster, right? So, a bunch of integration tests, good unit test coverage, monitoring, observability, quite key as well, actually.
Yeah.
Logs, quite passionate about those things too. So, and like bug count and things like that also help. I think what helps more is bucketing. Where we're finding these bugs,
Yes.
right? Are we finding bugs in live?
Yeah.
Well, that's a problem. We need to probably re-strategize what we're doing there. Are we finding problems in stage? So that maybe going, okay, so we should do something about finding them earlier, maybe, right? So there's probably something wrong with our branching strategy in some cases and stuff like that. So it kind of helps us strategize. So I'm not overly fussed about bug count, but I care about bug bucketing because that gives you a pattern, gives you a bit of a trend.
Yeah.
So that's important as well. But I think to be fair, right, test coverage, it's quite difficult to measure. I mean, some people have sort of haven't, a lot of people have a go at sort of doing that, add unit test coverage plus into it. It doesn't quite work in that way. So it's a bit of a heat map type thing, I think. So need to understand, what's covered, what are the key, high priority functionalities that are covered and things like that. So kind of, getting a little bit of confidence through like, test confidence or test efficacy. So if we're kind of, running, like 50 tests, 5 regression sort of cycles, never found a problem, there's something going on. We've got to revise, how we're running our regression tests in that way. I've had examples in the past where we're kind of running API tests all the time, even when the APIs were not changed. I mean, they're contained, right? So if you're not changing them, don't need to run them. I mean, it's great you're running tests, but you're not really getting much out of it. So understanding that. So, test coverage is quite important still in that way. Code smells and things like that. If we're going granular, like making sure we're actually writing decent code as well. So that means working with engineers, and if it means advocating for better quality coding, do that. But at least have some sort of dashboard where we can see what's been going on, failed builds and things like that. So just for us to collectively understand, or find areas to kind of improve ourselves or be better at. Whole host of things really, but I think I kind of tend to focus heavily around and I think flakiness scoring when it comes to there are some applications we've kind of worked on end-to-end type testing, front-end facing. I mean, it takes long to sort of test it manually, and therefore we've automated these user journeys, but some of these kind of time out and things like that. So a little bit of flakiness because it comes for free, so it's not overly difficult to kind of collate these numbers, right? If it was a manual effort and all of that, probably not worthwhile. But where we can get these, the data that we need for free, absolutely make use of it. So flakiness scoring, finding your, high value tests and stuff like that, some sort of classification there to collectively provide confidence. So, that's not one thing that you can measure, just like quality, confidence. But you can sort of point your finger at, how confident are you? Where are you? Give me a bit of a ballpark. Yeah, I'm quite confident. I'm not quite confident. So kind of, and that becomes a part of culture then as well. So I think those things really not only particular about, I need these 5 metrics all the time. But what about you actually on that as well?
Yeah, just before I jump into that, a combination of all those things, right? Tell a story, right? So, and I think that's the key thing, and like for me, there's, what I want to see us measuring are, things like feedback loops throughout the journey that help us build confidence, right? So that if we get to a decision, or whenever that decision to release becomes, we're like, yeah, well, it's a no-brainer, right? Why wouldn't we release, right?
Yeah.
That's the ideal, right? And it's kind of like, that's where you want to be, and that comes through a whole host of different things,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I always talk about having feedback loops throughout. So, right, you mentioned about people get hung up on being, having gates. I don't like the term gates. I prefer to use the term feedback loops, right?
Yeah.
So how and where can we get feedback on the quality or the confidence of the quality that we've got in our process, in our application, and so on. But yeah, when you were talking about bugs, for example, another area for me is kind of like, the bug clusters.
Yeah.
So
No,
you're finding,
yeah.
clusters of bugs in certain parts of the
Yeah.
application. Well, what does that tell us?
Yeah.
Right? Could be that we might have a lot of technical debt in that place, right? So every time we make a code change, we're
Yeah.
building, on top of something that's already not that great, right? Or it could be that we've got like really spaghetti code that just needs to be unpicked and broken out, and so those sorts of things as well. And one of the things I've always been interested, and I will always use this as an example of just throwing out as a question. If we put a release out and there's a critical bug that we need to fix, how confident are we that we can get it back through our pipelines?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because often it's not the fact that people are scared to put things out in case there is a bug into production.
Yeah.
They're scared or less confident because it takes time to get it through the pipeline. The tests might be flaky. There's the environments might not be up to scratch. All these pieces, right? So I always find that's a really good indicator of if something goes wrong in productions, what do we do? Now, I'm a big fan of fixing forward, unless it's catastrophic and you just have to roll back, right?
Yeah.
But you should, in theory, be in a position where you can fix forward really quickly with confidence, and get a change out like that. Not an issue. If you're not there, that also tells you something. So I think there's a number of different elements that you can start thinking about, and technical debt also. You might measure technical debt or not, but for me, again, however you track that, that's a really good indicator of the quality of what we build and what we build on top of and
You're
stuff.
right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was part of my own development, debt 2 times. I was sort of going, finding problems, fixing that. It's nothing really changing, right? I think, there's always, spaghetti code somewhere, right? It was then the case of actually getting involved with architecture side of things as well. I
Yep.
mean, that was one thing I maybe missed earlier, right? So multiple hats,
Yep.
QAs, architects as well. So I kind of, operated as like a pseudo architect there, right? So understanding, okay, like event-driven systems. So why, the message flows and things like that. So getting to challenge those things. I think, quite glad that you mentioned feedback loops there, right? And the whole idea is to kind of bring that close to source, right? Earlier the better, so good coverage in terms of unit tests, better integration test means there's not a lot of need for like the end-to-end testers all that much, right?
Yep.
So we're kind of, doing like really good like stubbing, mocking, interceptor patterns and all of that. It kind of means that integration testing element, most of the time becomes like that handshake testing, right? So, so architecture is a big thing in quality as well. And a lot of times when people sort of think black box, right, and hung up on these exploratory tests and, just testing everything after everything's done and complete, doesn't allow us that opportunity to kind of get close to the architect and getting to challenge that, just like requirements.
Yep.
Um,
It's testability, right?
Testability, exactly. Making
you
sure
know,
we're running testable solutions. Yeah,
yeah, exactly that. And being able to test the architectural design before even a line of code has been written, that's it's hugely beneficial, right? And because if you're thinking about it at an enterprise level or you're thinking about it at a solution level, right, there's different layers of architecture, but we should always be thinking about the testability of whatever it is we're designing or whatever it is that we're building. And often those things get missed. And this is something actually, because I said at the start we will get onto AI, and I think this is quite a nice segue actually, because this is something that I just sprung into my brain. As we start using AI more and more and more, do some of these things become harder? So how do you, if you're using AI to write your code and design your code, your solution and stuff like that, who's talking about testability, right? So
I know.
Anyway, let's start talking about
Oh God,
that's a terrible segue, but it just come into my brain. I was like,
But
I think, it just throws questions out there, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I think one thing we're definitely going to achieve through AI is speed. Of development. By the way, I'm not saying performance. For example, writing 10 lines of code, AI probably does it quick. I mean, clearly, definitely does it quicker. So over time, this is just a prediction, right? I think it becomes more about like accuracy and reliability. I think I did give this example the other day as well. So how many times out of 10 is 2 + 2 4? If it's 9 times out of 10, is that good enough? I think we'll start having those types of conversations. I think in the future. Not. I don't think we're ready for it today. We need to babysit AI still. As humans, right? I feel like we're kind of at that stage where we're sort of verifying certain things. Whether it's as a system or a module or whatever that might be, right? I'm not saying AI can't do much, but I feel like there is an element of babysitting and making sure we're doing all these checks and things like that. What scares me a little bit is this non-deterministic. Obviously testing's mostly been like deterministic. And it's easier in that way as well. So obviously we've got clear requirements. We're kind of mapping our tests or executable specifications or our tests back to that. And when there is mapping, we sort of go, actually things are validated, verified. But with non-deterministic, when AI just decides itself, how do we test that now? Because we don't know what the outcome's supposed to be. So I think that is going to be a challenge. And that's probably where like the whole accuracy, reliability over, a period of time becomes key. Probably training. I know I've kind of had, talks, and so many AI agents kind of reach out to me about, I've got this perfect test automation solution, things like that.
Of course they have.
No code solutions, right?
Of course they have.
But, how do we make sure this is going to be maintainable, scalable? Probably our mindset will have to change. I don't know, probably being too conservative here, right? I'm quite passionate about like design patterns, making sure the framework's actually broken down quite nicely, your page object model, some form of design pattern when it comes to API testing, right? So you've got your common objects in one place and things like that. That's always been, people like quite keen on like good practice. We've always kind of talked about those things. That's definitely gone out the window with what AI is offering right now in the name of no code solution. It's a lot better and than like Selenium Firefox from 2012. It's definitely come a long way and does a better job, and it's probably quicker to kind of spin it up. But is it a solution for today? I'm not 100% convinced, right? But are things going to change, and is it going to be more accurate, better? It's probably even going to have some sort of design pattern in the future. It is, I think. Things are going to change and only evolve. But I think that training piece, how do we train AI to understand, our model, what we're trying to do? Our testing maybe becomes slightly different. Yeah, things are up in the air a little bit, but not scary though. I think we're always ready for any challenge, right? I mean, I'm sure we kind of worked on like monolithic solutions in the past. We've worked on like event-driven, microservices and all of that as well. It was that evolution we've already seen, and test automation in itself, it's been a big evolution in some ways. But I think it's going to be another layer of evolution for us, and we're all in it together. Engineers, us, companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think you know we've always had to embrace change, right? It's just part
Yeah,
of what we've had to do. You work in tech, you have to embrace change. It's just
yeah,
else we'd all be out of jobs at some point because tech evolves so rapidly. I think the speed at which things are moving is a concern, but I think the speed at which adoption without clarity or guidance or is for me is something that we need to be very mindful of. It's kind of you read it, you hear it. Organizations are investing huge amounts of money, right? Huge
yeah,
amounts of money, and I get it, right? But where are they investing that money? Are they investing the money in the tooling, or are they
yeah,
investing that money also in the people to train the
yeah,
people to make sure that they understand and they're able
yeah,
to use it in the most effective and efficient way to coming back to outcomes, right? To what are we trying to achieve by adopting AI? What is it we want to achieve? What do we need to achieve?
yeah,
Um, and I think that for me will be the differentiator between different organizations in terms
yeah,
of the investment back into people. And then we've seen it, right? Actually, the investment into AI has removed investment into people because people have
yeah.
been made redundant.
Brilliant,
um
yeah.
and
Tech.
and that's my concern, is kind of that it's not just the investment into technology, it's the investment into the people that need to ultimately still use
Yeah.
and maintain and measure this technology.
No, I think 100%. People become even more important. As AI kind of gets smarter. So
Mm,
definitely invest in people. There's no question. I mean, behind that. One thing I think we might have missed though, right, is do you know how we picked up those skills? As we were in these like boiler cooker like situations,
yes.
right? Through, but I feel like I'm kind of scared for like the new starters, the juniors, graduates,
Yeah.
right? Are they going to pick up the skills that they're gonna need, in the
Yeah.
future? Are they going to pick up these bad habits early on? Are they just going
mm,
to rely on AI totally to make
mm,
decisions for them? That concerns me. If people can be quite confident in terms of their skill set and they're using any AI tool, Claude or your, Copilot, whatever that is, if they're using that as a tool, if they're going to, make them more efficient in terms of the work that they're doing, great. But I
mm,
think, I'm kind of worried about like the newcomers, right? So how they're going to, my cousin was sharing this, right? So they had to do a little bit of data modeling, in their group project.
okay.
Somebody just basically pasted something off ChatGPT and it didn't even make sense. And and they kind of lost the whole opportunity to maybe learn,
mm,
about. I mean, if you let ChatGPT take exams, I'm sure it'll do well in these university exams, right?
right.
you
Yeah.
know, but people have got to learn these skills. So if they're going to be lazy and just rely on AI completely to make
mm,
these decisions for them, that's concerning. But
yeah.
at the same time, they use that as a tool to kind of help achieve more, for example, or do things quicker. Great,
mm.
So two angles to it.
Yeah, that is certainly something that concerns me, and I think it's coming back to the educational system. We were talking about it earlier, how that is taught through the educational system. Making sure that people still understand the fundamentals, the foundational knowledge, and stuff like that. But like you said, right, it's we don't want people becoming just lazy.
Yeah,
We want people to become effective and efficient.
yeah, yeah,
Lazy isn't what we want, right? And
yeah, yeah,
we need to define what efficient is and define what effective is. And
yeah.
as I say, all these things are new, right? And we have to find our way through these things and have these conversations because and everybody will learn at different speeds as well. Um, and what we don't want to do is we also don't want to start creating silos within our teams where one discipline is like racing ahead with AI and then it's causing a problem in another discipline and so on. So it's going to be really interesting. It's I mean, buckle up, people, because it's just going to keep going. It's
I
not
know.
going anywhere.
I think there's some key themes though of where QAs can utilize AI already.
Mm,
Is I suppose requirement analysis. I know there's a lot of work being done. I think some of these test case management tools already offer that. Um, Using that to validate, verify in some ways, and not completely relying on it definitely is an option right now.
mm,
So it can be used. You like coding generally.
yep,
But making sure we're kind of aligning with our engineering practice though, in terms of using Copilot, for example, is what I recommend, some of our QAs do. The writing code, making sure things are reviewed as well, so peer reviewed. So I
yep,
don't want just QAs to review their automation work. It's kind of shared with engineers as well.
yep,
We get their thoughts. We're kind of keeping our coding standards the same in
yep,
terms of QA engineering. So kind of staying as close to engineering practice as possible,
yep.
but utilizing Copilot or whatever. We've kind of used like um, uh, things in the past, right? With like, for example, any IDEs we've kind of used,
Mm,
we've always had some form of support, to kind of, help give us these like, methods that we need at times. So it's
mm,
just that extra layer of support we get from AI now. So it's okay.
yep,
I think automation work, like completely letting AI sort of do like your no code solutions. I'm not entirely convinced, but I think it works for some companies where
mm,
they need some quick feedback. They're not really bothered about like maintainability, scalability. Probably works. I think there's that. But I'm kind of looking at things beyond that at matrix. Can we actually squeeze out like patterns and trends from within our automation suite?
mm,
You know,
yeah,
it's definitely an option, and a lot of AI agents already support that. But
mm,
we can actually create something using one of the tools available as well. And the other option I'm also trialing at the moment is like these boilerplate templates and things like that. So
right,
like quickly creating the stuff that we need, the frameworky stuff, right? You don't need to handcraft it. If we train AI enough, it kind of does that job. And and QAs then just focus on building tests from that point.
mm,
So there are some areas that we can already explore. People can sort of try and learn from the resource that's available. And the worst thing we want to do as a QA industry is to sort of panic and worry. I know some companies sort of making people redundant and stuff like that,
yeah,
but I think the core skills of QA is not replaceable. We think, we're humans, right? Our instincts kind of matter.
mm,
The soft skills never going to be replaced, and that's exactly why I focus on soft skills over hard skills.
yeah,
And soft skill, you can't have AI sort of having these soft skills. I know, you can make videos and you know podcast using AI now,
yeah,
uh, but I think those soft skills are quite key as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just, to just sort of close that out there, Jag, it all just comes back to understanding the why, right? Why are we doing these things? Why has AI done that? Why? And if you don't know the why, then that's even if it writes your framework for you, you still need to understand why it's written it in that way, so you can then validate it to say, I'm okay with that, right? That makes
Yeah,
sense or not. So
that's it.
yeah,
You offer that zoom out view, right?
mm,
It's the bird eye. But the problem with like the mid-level testers, junior testers don't quite maybe have that, and they
yeah,
might feel overwhelmed,
yeah,
with the whole development that's happening in this world. But I think do reach out to your test leads, your managers,
exactly.
try and get their thoughts on what the future of AI may be. Try and go to
Mm,
some conferences, try and go to some like talks and all
yeah,
sorts of places. Reach out to us, for example, if you've got any worries, concerns, or thoughts and ideas about AI,
mm,
right? But being able to sort of zoom out a little bit and focus on the bigger why
yeah,
answers a lot of questions, I think.
100%. And I think that brings us nicely to the end of our conversation, Joe, because we could keep talking for
So,
hours
flame what?
more, couldn't we?
That's
This has been great. Thank you so much, my friend. Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation this evening. As always, I always give the last words to our guests, like final
yeah.
thoughts of anything you want to share with the audience before we wrap up.
Yeah. No, thank you, Stu. Great opportunity. I see your podcast doing really well. All the best with all of this.
Thank you.
And it feels great to be a part of that community, like wider community. I think, these things will help the up and coming QAs as well about, understanding our journey, where things are, how we see things as well in many ways. And there've been like so many great guests in your show already. So, great stuff. I think, yeah, I think to QAs or the industry, I'd say there's so much in us, and we've got to sell ourselves better in that way. I think QA is a you know really important skill and really valuable skill, and don't undersell yourselves, right? So we kind of bring that perspective. We bring the ability to wear multiple hats. Yes, AI or otherwise, we're always going to be important. Um, try and not be scared of change. I mean, that's our nature, though. I think QAs, we've always sort of had to adapt and be
Mm,
flexible in our approach all the time. Like project to project, we've kind of had to change our approach. Kind of see like future development AI as that as well. And for anybody who are maybe considering QA as a potential career, it's a great career. It kind of gives you so
it
many
is.
opportunities. You kind of bring your own style, into QA as well. So there's no one way to QA. Everybody's different. And that's a great thing about QA as well.
Mm.
But look, do reach out to me. Stu's a friendly guy as well. I mean, I met you
I'm
a
okay.
couple of times actually before that MOT, and we'd had like brief chats. But I think
Yeah,
meeting you at MOT on that day, was great. And yeah, just want to say, reach out to us at
yeah,
any point.
100%.
And thank you very much. Yeah.
No, it's been a pleasure, my friend. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. And that's it, everybody. So another episode of the podcast done and dusted. Massive thank you to Jag for joining us and sharing his wisdom. And who knows what's going to happen with AI, but you've heard some things here this evening that may help you sort of navigate that world as well, moving forward. But yeah, by all means, reach out and we can chat more as well. And there's a lot of interesting insights on different platforms out there around people's experience with AI and where that's going. But what's been the key message this evening? Soft skills, that humanistic element to the role, right? If you're going to take anything away, think about that. Think about how you can develop your soft skills, be a really great communicator, question asker, answerer as well. Those things never go away. Okay, so think about how you can develop those moving forward. But that's it. We're going to wrap this up. Another episode in the books. Another great episode in the books. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, like, subscribe, smash that subscribe button. Come on, we're almost at 400 subscribers on YouTube. We're almost there. Smash it. Share it with your friends, share it with your neighbors, share it with your colleagues, share it with the strangers in the street. Anybody else they can share it with, Jag?
Yeah. Your cricket team, football team.
Your cricket team, your football team. Just
Yeah.
share the
Your friend
damn
that follows
podcast,
Gators.
people. Just share it. But more importantly, make sure to join us next time on another episode of Quality Talks podcast. Take care for now.